Okay, and we are live for sure this time. All right, guys. Welcome back to the sanctuary. And I'm echoing. I'm just gonna fix that. Awesome. We are back with we're back with my friend Amber again. As I mentioned last time, Amber has one of the coolest YouTube channels. I love her YouTube channel. And so, Amber, why don't you reintroduce yourself to some of my people, remind people who you are, what you do, and yeah, and we'll take it from there.
All right. So now you just threw me off. My name's Amber, and I run the YouTube channel When Deep Calls Deep, and over there I specialize in the Old Testament. I get into the Hebrew, the ancient Near East, and now I'm going to be adding in the Septuagint because we're going to take a look at both, and just it's really cool, some stuff there. And I also deal with intertextuality and the biblical narrative. And it just keeps getting better and better. The more I learn, the less I know, and the bigger the topic gets. It's like one of those things, you rabbit holes that you will never find the end of, and it's amazing because it's a lot of fun. And I'm also on winter break, my last year in seminary, so I have 4 months to go to finish off my thesis, and if I still am surviving and standing at the end of that, I will graduate hopefully at the beginning of May. So looking forward to that, hopefully. And then who knows what? Maybe a doctoral degree. I have no idea. I'm just trying to get through Christmas at this point and take a break and have some fun and do some interesting things. And I'm actually impressed that at a pastor halfway through Advent, you're still actually vertical and able to speak coherently at this point.
Well, on that, tomorrow is actually our Christmas concert that we're holding at our church. And I'm exhausted today, so I don't even know how I'm going to get through tomorrow, but we will get through it somehow. But yeah, so with that being said, Amber was recently interviewed on Will Hess's channel earlier on in the week, in which for the first time, Amber, you kind of gave your story publicly about your journey into the Orthodox Church. And part of the purpose of this video is I want to introduce some people, especially people in Canada, who don't really have a lot of interaction with Orthodox Christians or Orthodox theology. So really what I want to tackle in this video is we want to tackle the incarnation. We want to talk about things like why is Christmas actually important? Because growing up as a Protestant, I knew Christmas was a big deal, but theologically, I really had no idea why. Jesus had to be born to go to the cross because that's what saves us. That was pretty much my understanding of Christmas. But it was always, honestly, it was always one of my favorite holidays. So I cannot wait to talk about the Orthodox view of the incarnation. But before we get there, why don't you give us a little bit of a glimpse into your world? How did you go from being a Protestant, and what was your journey? How did you find your place in the Orthodox Church? How did that happen?
Yeah, for the full 2-hour version, go watch the Church Split, because we don't want to go into that whole big log thing again. And Will and I went pretty deep into that story there. But just kind of the basic overview of that, growing up in a tradition that was fairly wooden in their legalistic in their application, but they were also very enthusiastic about evangelism and in their systematic theology. After a while, because of a series of events that I've talked about in the interview with Will, things just got to be very, very difficult, and I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere in the church anymore. And so I started a journey trying to figure out why that was. And as I started studying deeper and deeper, it made less and less sense. Like the Protestant theology that I grew up with and everything that I was convinced was true started to fall apart. And I like to joke with some of my friends that the person who actually started my journey into Eastern Orthodoxy was Mike Winger, because I started watching a video series of his trying to, you know, work on trying to understand a particular issue and topic. And I was so unimpressed that I started looking elsewhere for other answers, which is how I ended up becoming friends with Nick Quint. And because of that, then I ended up, you know, uh, getting into watching Leighton Flowers' channel, and then I met Warren McGrew, and then I met Will Hess, and it just kind of that all those connections led me to uh, being, going to seminary, learning about the Old Testament, learning Hebrew, learning how to understand the ancient Near East mind, and how it's written from a very different perspective, and our modern Western understanding of how that kind of functions and the way those things kind of work together, um, is very different than the way Western systematic theology thinks about that stuff. And so that started crumbling, and then I was like, I can't be a Protestant. I don't know where I belong, but I don't belong over here. And I was kind of just floating for a little while. And then I ran into, through when I was doing a bunch of stuff on Faith Unaltered, that channel over there, ran into, with Tyler Fowler, and uh, Tyler and Josh Davidson introduced me to a group of people who have done collabs and work on things on their channel before, and they were all Orthodox or very sympathetic, and really liked a lot of Orthodox theology and worldview and things like that. And so through that process, I got introduced to a real good friend. His name is actually my sponsor in the Orthodox Church, because that's it's an interesting process. But he spent several months encouraging me to go, not just to an Orthodox church, but to go to a Catholic church, go to an Anglican church, like go find where you feel like you're called, like that's where Christ is waiting for you. Like go try some other things and don't just do this one thing, which I kind of did, and I found a home where I'm at now, in the parish that I go to. And then Troy also brought me in and introduced me to a whole nother group of people who are fantastic. And they all, some of them are Orthodox, some of them have also become Orthodox around the same time that I did and finished that journey into the church. And some of them are still like, I'm not ready to take that leap, and I'm good, and I love hanging out with you guys, and it's fun, and I appreciate the theology, and that's okay too. And we get along, we have a fantastic time. And but I will, I think, always be grateful for this great group of supportive friends who kind of walked through this journey and helped me kind of, because Orthodox theology is very, very different for Western minds to get their heads around, especially modern American Westerners. It can seem extremely foreign, and there's some stuff in there that, like in the tradition that I grew up in, rejects creeds, rejects ecclesiastical structure. It rejects pretty much anything that they don't think that they see in Acts 2. And beyond that, they just kind of do their own thing and make it up as they go along. So it's very different, and they believe some of the things now that there's some points that I had very difficult entry on because of the way I grew up, and certain things to be taught that it was idol worship, and you're like mediums that are summoning the dead and all this like crazy stuff that was a challenge. But I had very good guides, and that really wrestled through a lot of complicated, because Orthodox theology is not what you would consider systematic theology. It's more apophatic, which is a total different way of thinking about things. And the phronema is so different that it was, I'm still like I don't officially speak for anybody for anything. This is all just what I have learned and what I've been taught. I don't dare speak for the church. I'm not qualified and definitely wouldn't even dare to try. I just, like all of this, just things that I've learned. And it's been fun to talk about because it is such a beautiful, different whole way to look at things when the church, instead of, the way I grew up in, has become what it is now for me. And I just absolutely love it. So that's just kind of the very short version of how I ended up in the Orthodox Church.
Very cool. So, Amber, I feel like I have to ask you this question. What is the thing that you absolutely fell in love with in the Orthodox Church? And secondary, because it was a very different world than the Protestant world that you were brought up in. What was the hardest thing for you to wrap your mind around as a previous Protestant walking into the Orthodox world? Maybe start with what do you love? What do you love the most about the Orthodox Church?
I think the thing that I love the most about the Orthodox Church is they take a couple of things extremely seriously in a way that I had never experienced before, but that I saw in the Old Testament, and the way that I was trained to understand the ancient Near East and the way the Hebrew works and the way that thinks, and it's all of that. Like I saw that my very first time at an Orthodox service. I walked in and I was just blown away. I'm like, I am in the book of Leviticus right now, and this is crazy, and I love it. But I think that, first of all, one, they have an understanding that the okay, I'm going to try to keep the technical terms to a minimum here. I don't want to confuse people but it's sometimes easier. But so there's a theology that's called Christian anthropology, which talks about the theology of man, not like man isn't a male, but is human. So there's the theology of being human. And then that's affected by something that's called ontology, which is the sin nature and the human condition. So it kind of goes together, those two things. So it's kind of like it's technical and complicated, but basically, so the Orthodox, so most Protestant traditions are going to have an ontology that is a downstream, very skewed version that starts with Augustine. He kind of starts the split a little bit there. But Westerners also read Augustine out of context, and so it has made the problem a lot worse. But basically,
and usually one sentence at a time,
right?
Typically,
and you have and that's a whole nother conversation. But but basically, we think and we believe that instead of like the Protestant view that sin is some kind of a moral corruption that you start with, that is also caused by like the transgressions. And so I do something and I have guilt. And so that makes me even more morally corrupt. So it's basically just, this moral, corrupt legal debt that you incur by just doing life and things. And in the Orthodox Church and in church history, up until that's debatable where that splits, because it's very complicated history. But the Orthodox view sin as a sickness. They view that as like, I inherit a chronic condition and wounds to my soul that need to be healed. So we never lose the image of God. We never lose, we're not born morally corrupt. So we don't have bad parts. I'm not bad. I'm just sick. And most of us are very, very sick. When you look at all of, how deep some of these things go with pride and arrogance and false self-love, and all of those things are trauma. Like all of it is sickness and wounds in the soul. And so everything God does out of love is to try to heal us, to restore us back into relationship, which is a whole lot more, I think, in keeping with God's character than God sitting there at this big judicial bench waiting to, smack you and send you to jail and condemn you into, hell forever. Like, there is judgment, and we definitely believe and take that very seriously. But even judgment is meant to, like Torah does, to separate you so that you realize how sick you are, so that God can heal you, to bring you back into relationship. So it's a very different view on persons and people, and learning how to see God in Christ in others, because Christ lives in us. And it just is a whole different way to look at, because it's harder for me to be angry with you, and it's harder for me to hate you, and it's harder for me to treat you poorly, when I understand, instead of you just doing bad things because you're bad, no, you're sick and you can't help it. So I need to show you mercy, I need to show you patience, I need to show you love, because that's what God does for me. So it's a whole different way of looking at humans and other people, in a way that's much more loving and compassionate, which I think is the biggest thing I fell in love with, was that understanding of how, so many Protestant theologies turn God into, an angry, offended deity demanding payment and suffering before he sentences people, and that creates a relationship with, when your God is a judge that's willing to, try and condemn you. My reaction and my relationship with God is going to be more about, how do I, like in an American courtroom, how do I make myself as presentable as possible, to make things as not as my fault as possible, to try to get out of as much punishment as I can, which is not a loving relationship with God. So it's not loving on God's part, and God cannot violate that part. Is his character, his essence is loving. And so when I am sick and he is the physician and he is the one who can show mercy, and God's loving character cannot violate our free will. So I can at any time choose, God, please help me. God, please give me mercy. And we hope that in his mercy he will. But I can also choose to reject that at any point in time. So, it's also not God forcing me to believe that, I'm always saved, and then I get lazy and wind up and found out that I'm not, because I'm not living out my faith in the way that brings about spiritual growth in the way that it's supposed to. We call it theosis. You guys call it justification, sanctification, glorification. They're still different, but that's the basic close comparison, if there is one. And but just to see it from the point of view that God's love isn't even going to violate our free will to force us to go to heaven or to force us to go to hell. That's completely up to me. I make that choice to follow Christ or not. And that's very much the way that the Orthodox view it, which to me feels a lot more in line with the character of that, that I was reading in scripture that I wasn't hearing in the other contexts that I was in that way.
Mm. So it sounds like in Orthodox theology they have a different view when it comes to sin, with especially with Western Protestants. Their theology, it almost makes it, I guess it has a lot to do with morality and whether or not we are a good, usually not, but like labeling everybody, you were just inherently bad people, and you need God to make you a good person. And it sounds like Orthodox theology of sin does not land there.
No, it doesn't. Because you and I are born with no bad parts, but we are born sick. And I don't know very many people who would walk up to a sick baby and, just or send a young child who doesn't know any better. You're not going to send a toddler to prison because he stole something from a friend. Like, they don't know any better. We're born with some of that sickness, because some sickness is passed down, but not in a way that makes you corrupt or bad. You don't start bad and get good. God declared creation very good when humans were created. God declared all of creation very good. That's never been reversed. I'm still born with that goodness, but I'm so sick that it's like overwhelms the goodness. So I mess up a lot because I'm hurt and I'm sick. And that is what we have to learn how to let God heal, which is a very long, lifelong, painful process. It's not instant. It takes a lifetime to hope to get to the point where you can say that you're healed. But it's, in a way, that view is easier to kind of ingest, but it's a lot harder to live out.
Mm-hmm. Wow, we could talk about so many things. I mean, we could do an entire video just talking about what the Orthodox would call the other word for divinization.
I mean, theosis?
Theosis, yeah. Like we could spend 2 hours just talking about that. Maybe that'll be another video, but
yeah, I don't know. That's a complicated one that a lot of it goes over. It still goes over my head. There's most of this. I'm like, this is what I hear from my parish and what they're trying to get into my thick head to try to understand this. So, I will try to remember to say this several times. Always go and ask a priest if you're not sure. Find the local priest and go and talk to them, because they will fix every dumb thing I say that's wrong and explain it much better than I do. But this is just like the things that I've learned. So it's not official. We don't have official systematic theology. We have, that's a whole nother conversation too, but
yeah. Okay. Well, with that being said, let's take a little bit of time. Let's talk about the Bible. In my corner of the internet, I often see Catholic people in these online debates with Protestants, and they like to argue about like the Protestants, they have a shorter Bible because they took books out, and the Protestants will say, well, the Catholics, they have a longer Bible because they added books, and they're both wrong. But part of me, when I see these conversations, because I spent some time researching the Orthodox Bible, which is even bigger than the Catholic one. Can we talk about that for a while? And specifically, because I'm an Old Testament guy, your Old Testament is the Septuagint. Can we please talk about that?
This is chapter 1 of my thesis, so I am loving this. It's like, awesome. I had to get into this debate far enough to know I'd never wanted to get into this debate, but it's actually a really cool story how this whole kind of thing. And again, this is a very truncated 50,000-foot view, so there's a lot of room for differences of opinion here. But as far as the work that I did, because I dealing with the deuterocanonical books, as my thesis is talking about those, so this is definitely in my wheelhouse now. So we start off with there is actually, if you look at the history of this, not a settled canon for a really, really, really long time. So you'll see various lists, and different church fathers will have different lists. But okay, so newsflash for most Protestants: if you pick up your Old Testament and the I don't know, 36, I don't even remember now anymore, 32, whatever it is, books that are in your Protestant Bible. So if you turn to your table of contents and there's your list, that list is what's called from the Masoretic text, which is a late development after Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That's when that version shows up. So
Mm-hmm.
before that, there is most of the world for several hundred years is using something that's called the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Hebrew. But there are some books in the Septuagint that are written in Greek. So not all of them originate in Hebrew. Most of them do. Some of them don't, which is where the difference in the canon lists comes in. But so the Septuagint was originally started with the first 5, the Torah books, and then that expanded, and then they kept adding, but it varies the lists depending on where you are, and it's really interesting. When I was looking into this and trying to track down like where do these lists come from and where do they start and all of this kind of stuff, the Septuagint translation is not based on the Masoretic text that you have. That's the base of the Protestant Old Testament. Okay, the Septuagint comes from an older Hebrew version that we know because of the way that the Septuagint translates and because of the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found, confirm the Septuagint, which points to an older an older Hebrew version than the Masoretic text. Okay, so you've got to think about this as you've got like 2 different Hebrew Bibles going on there, but there's all these have 5,700 versions in between all of this. So like I said, very truncated view. But so we don't actually have a preserved list of the original Hebrew version that the Septuagint was translated from. That's been lost. So we don't know what order those books were in. We don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know. We know that they were kind of grouped together because the New Testament talks a lot about the law and the prophets. And there's, it's broken down into the law, the prophets, and everything else. So there's kind of categorized that way. And we kind of know from that, but we don't really have anything definitive that says that Protestant order is the way that the original Hebrew from the Septuagint was in that order. So you see people moving things around. The Septuagint version, depending on which Septuagint you're looking at, is very different from the Protestant order. The books are in very wildly. This was crazy to get my head around because I do biblical narrative and biblical theology. And so even just looking at the biblical narrative between the order of the books makes a big difference. And so when you've got several different orders, because the Eastern Orthodox have an order, the Coptics and the Oriental Orthodox have a different order, and the Roman Catholics have a different order, and the Protestants have a different order that are all based on different things. The story is going to be different depending on the order that you tell it in. But the beautiful thing about it is that they actually weave together this very beautiful multi-level layered story. So I think it's a bit of a stretch to say, like, well, we're going to completely discredit yours because it's not like mine. Well, let's sit down and let's compare stories, and I can learn cool stuff from your story and you can learn cool stuff from my story, and we both of us walk away with a better story. So I think discounting because now you use a Reformation level, list Bible, and I use an Orthodox one. We have different Old Testaments to say mine's right and yours wrong, or yours is right and mine's wrong. I think you're missing the boat there. I think that you get a very different story when you read those Old Testaments in those different orders, but when you put them together, it's even better. The story gets even cooler because there's more and more and more layers that make it so complex and so beautiful that you miss if you only read one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to say to the audience, when Amber says things like it was later, or the Masoretic text was later, she's being like super generous when she says that. Like later is 1000 AD later. Like
Mhm.
we're talking like literally 1,000 years, was 1,000 years ago was when the Masoretes made the copy of the Hebrew Old Testament that we are familiar with as
Mhm.
Protestants. Um, and actually for a long time, atheist scholars, they used to really just rack us Christians over the coals, because a strong argument was that the Old Testament is not as old as we claim it was, because the oldest copies that we had only went back to the Middle Ages. But then we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then
Mhm.
we had it just revolutionized everything. But what I found was really interesting is a lot of what they found in the Dead Sea Scrolls match the Greek Septuagint,
Yep.
which is, to me, that's fascinating.
Mhm.
But also kind of the weird thing is that, because we like to talk about the original Hebrew when it comes to the Old Testament,
Mhm.
we love to talk about the Hebrew. But the weird thing is the Greek Septuagint, which is not the original Hebrew, actually is older than the actual Hebrew that is in our Old Testament. And so,
Well, yeah, so I'm gonna correct you a little bit on that,
sure,
because the Masoretic that you have now in your Protestant Old Testament is not the Hebrew that those books were written in. That
mhm,
is the Hebrew that was going on when that those books were assembled. So it was
right,
put
yeah,
into what was then modern Hebrew, okay? And the originals that the Septuagint was translated from was way older. Some of it was called Paleo Hebrew. Some of it was like there's all of those. You're not going to find if you okay. So say for Christmas we get this amazing thing and we find the collection of what's called the autographs of the Old Testament books, which means the original handwritten. Whoever wrote those down, like we find those.
the originals.
Yes, the original copies that whoever wrote those down. So we find the original Torah written by Moses and whoever was writing down what Moses was saying. So we find those is not going to be the same Hebrew that Baruch is writing down Jeremiah's words in. So, I mean,
Right.
because the Old Testament took a very long time to go through that. It's 1,000 years of history, right? So
Mhm.
language changes a little bit in 1,000 years. So even the Hebrew itself. So to say like the Hebrew, it depends on the book. It depends on when it was written. It depends on who the author was. Like there's a whole lot going on there that we don't have a lot of that. The Dead Sea Scrolls brought in and introduced us to a lot of some of the progression of that there was theories about and people were kind of working on trying to, but that was a major development in that because the Masoretic version is a later Hebrew that standardized the Hebrew across the Old Testament for consistency. And interesting point, in fact, is one of the things that I was surprised to learn as I was digging around and trying to get this figured out for my thesis work. People are like, okay, so this council has this definitive list, and this council has this definitive list, and this church father says this, and this thing says this, and this thing says this. So you have to be careful with that because when you start to try to stake your claim to say so and so made a definitive list on the what the books of the Bible were and what order they're supposed to be in. Okay, you have to understand a few things there. Number one, each of those in their own the way that the early church was worked and the way that the Orthodox Church still works. Each patriarchy or each district has its own authority and autonomy to kind of do its own thing as long as they're not getting away from the message of the gospel and what the apostles taught that the church should be doing. So, what's going to be relevant to fight Arian heresy in uh, Constantinople is not the same kind of thing that you're going to need in in the Roman patriarchy where they're dealing with the sun cult and trying to fight the Rome, Rome and the emperor, and he's actually God, and you're trying to. So they're dealing with different. So those lists of books and the order that they're in, and the different liturgies all develop as a shield against the heresies of the times in which they're functioning. So they have different purposes, and some of those are just lists to say, if you're a parish, or if you're a bishop, or if you're trying to start a church, here's the list of the books that you absolutely have to have. Like, these are the ones you absolutely need. Anything else outside of this list is bonus gravy for you. So even so, getting too wrapped up in this one definitively says this and this one definitively says that, like, that's not really how it works. So we need to also kind of back away from that a little bit to try to definitively point to, here's where the Bible started, because that doesn't work that way
Okay.
in the history of it. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, this is okay. This is brand new information. So I need to make sure I'm hearing you correctly.
Mhm.
I think I am, but I need to make sure.
Mhm.
Are you saying that when you were reading the patristics and they give a canon list,
Mhm.
they are not limiting it to those books, but they are saying this is the minimum that you should have? Like, am I hearing that correctly?
Right. So for their bishopry, or their patriarchy, or their district, or their jurisdiction, churches here need to have these books. But this isn't the exclusionary list. This is like, this is what your library needs to have. If you have more than this, that's awesome. See, like St. John Chrysostom told from the pulpit, told everybody, you need to get a Bible. Well, I'm sorry, but Bibles back then, to get what they had, was a couple $1,000s. And you're telling people who live on like $5 a year, like, get a Bible. So, but it's, this is all done liturgically, and there is a very different way to understand the order and the way things function when you're doing things liturgically, because they're placed in the liturgies in a specific order because they're telling a story. And so the list of books in one patriarch, so like, let's go back to the Byzantines and the Romans. So you've got the Roman, what becomes the Catholic Church, but the Roman Patriarchy before the schism. Okay, we're going to pre-schism, because we're not dealing with the schism. Pre-schism, you got the Roman Patriarchy, and you've got the Byzantines over at Constantinople, and that's now the Antiochians. Okay, so you've got the Antiochians, we got, the Council of Nicaea happens because there's all kinds of confusion, but we also have some issues in heresy. Arianism is a huge problem, and you got to figure that out. So we need a list of the books of the Bible, and we need to figure out how and where they go in the liturgy and how to tell the story. So if you've got a church, bishops, here's the books you need. So like, it gives people a way to say, here's what I have to have to read the stuff in liturgy. I have to have the Gospels. I've got to have a bunch of Old Testament stuff. I've got to have some stuff in the Apocrypha. There's things that you need to read for the liturgy services. And those are the collections that are the things you see coming from the church fathers, because their place, their space, they have stuff that they are dealing with, which is very different. So dealing with Arians is going to be different than dealing with the sun cult in Rome and establishing the date of Christmas as December 25th. Because in the East, for a really long time, it was January 6th, which a lot of Oriental Orthodox or the old calendar still do, which is why the dates are different.
Okay, so the Oriental Orthodox, they still celebrate Christmas at the beginning of December.
Right, it's or the beginning of January, as far as I know.
Of January, yeah.
Yeah, January 6th, I think. We're getting into stuff that we're getting to the edge of what I've learned about. So take a lot of this with a grain of salt. But yeah, it's because like in the Roman Patriarchy, they're dealing with the sun the sun cults and establishing the date of Christmas, and they're dealing with, you've got Rome and the Roman emperors and declaring themselves, God. So by the time you get to the time of the New Testament in the early church, you've got Nero and all those guys that are like, "Hi, I'm God on earth," and they're like, "No, you're not." And so each of the liturgies and the canon lists are developed for the liturgies to battle those heresies. So,
Mm.
they all develop independently to meet the need of the area that's going on at the time. There's not like one dictatorial list of here is what you have to have. That's a development that happens after the schism from the Roman, what becomes the Catholic Church with the magisterium and the Pope. And the Pope says, guess what, guys? Here's the rules. Everybody has to do it. And that's not the way that the Orthodox works.
Okay. So you were answering so many questions that I barely knew I had.
Okay.
Okay, so one thing you just clarified for me is that I do remember reading certain church fathers, and I can't remember which ones off the top of my head, but I do remember some of them. They will give a canon list, and it sometimes it is the Protestant 66 book canon, but then in one of their sermons they will quote from one of the deuterocanonical books as scripture in their sermons. And so you're saying this is why.
This is why, because it's still considered, because and here's another one that's going to blow your mind. The Orthodox Church doesn't have a closed canon. It still doesn't. Because tradition, yes, because tradition is in there. The liturgy is part of the canon. The praxis is part of the canon. The sacraments, it's all part of canon. So it's not limited to the physical book in our hands. There's so much more. The physical book in our hands is what we read from the authors of the faith, but it is done in the liturgy, in community, in the tradition, and it's all because it all holds itself in balance. And that's something that starts in Genesis 1. So, this is not a new thing. The church didn't just invent this out of thin air in 247 or whatever. Like that's also incorrect. Like this way of existing is built into Genesis 1. So it starts from creation, but we still don't have a closed canon. Because the tradition has life and it breathes, and it is anchored in time-tested Holy Spirit, but it also understands that cultures evolve and cultures are going to come into the church. And so it's going to have to make room for cultures and people and languages and things like that. So it isn't closed, but I that you're getting beyond the bounds of what I know there. So I don't want to speak anymore on that, because we're at the edge of my knowledge here. So
okay.
we'll
so
and
just so like we didn't really clarify for some of our listeners who aren't like stupid Old Testament nerds like we are. The Protestant canon is 66 books. I believe the Catholic the Catholic Bible is a little over 70. Is that right? 73, something like that.
I don't really know the Protestant, the Catholic canon that well. I don't know that I've ever sat down and counted the books beyond the prize. I haven't paid that much attention. I mean, it's a big part of my thesis, but I haven't actually sat down and go, hey, there's this many books in this one. There are more. And the definitions of what is allowable in the more changes depending on which tradition you're a part of. So
right. And so I think like there's a little bit of debate in the Orthodox Church when it comes to the Old Testament, but I think like typically an Orthodox Bible will be closer to 80 books. Is that right? something
It's
like
something
that.
like that. There's a lot of them, yes, but it's that again, we view this more, so this is I'll just say this. It all is anchored in the liturgy. What's
Mm,
included in there, and depending on how it's viewed, if it's read in liturgy or if it's read at home to help give extra context or information to what's read in the liturgy, that's what determines what gets made on the table of contents of the uh of the Orthodox study Bible. And I know that the Catholics have a different process, but I'm not
mm,
familiar with what that is, so I can't speak to that. They have different
mm.
apocryphal books than we do, um, but I don't know about
Right.
that. I'm just starting to get in my thesis work get into, because I'm arguing for the deuterocanonical books, or some of them. So, but I'm just starting to get into figuring all of that mess out, and I haven't quite figured out which ones are in and which ones are out, and the criteria for why, because it's a different, very different set of rules for that guidance in the Orthodox Church than it is in the Protestant world. So,
Right. Right. And okay. So let's go back to the Septuagint, because as
mhm,
we mentioned, the
right.
Orthodox Old Testament is the Greek Septuagint. Uh can you speak into like why the Old
Oh,
Testament is the Septuagint?
okay. This is another one of those swamps of a dumpster fire arguments that gets a little complicated. So I'll try my best. There are a few different versions of the Septuagint. So there's the Alexandrian canon, and there's I can't remember them off the top of my head. That was a chapter and a half ago of writing. So let me see if I can pull up some of my notes, because I know I'm going to mess this up. So again, go ask a priest if you want the real answer. Go ask a priest. Um, but it depends on which version that you use, because there's an Alexandrian version, which is an Egyptian development. There's a I don't remember off the top of my head. There's different versions of the Septuagint. Then there's the Latin Vulgate, which is a Latin translation of the Septuagint, which is where the Catholic list comes from, is more from the Vulgate, because they made decisions, and somebody misunderstood Jerome, who was misunderstood by somebody else, and Luther misunderstood who misunderstood who misunderstood who. Like, it's an interesting chain of who misunderstood who that's going on in a
I
lot
was
of
gonna
this.
say it's so unlike Christians for there to be a miscommunication.
Right, that never happens. But what's interesting is the version of the Old Testament list that you have depends on which Septuagint you're based on, because there's different books in different Septuagints. And interestingly, here you go. You ready for this? The Masoretic text came about because Palestinian there was a Palestinian rejection of the Greek to reclaim the Hebrew, and that's where the Masoretic text came from, was a
Mm,
rejection of the Septuagint, because everybody was using the Septuagint
mhm,
at this for several hundred years. The Septuagint was just the thing by the time you get to the New Testament. So
mhm.
this is another one of those misunderstanding things. So, and I want to also walk a very careful line here, because most of the time you're going to see two definitive camps. So you get this. We also love binaries. I don't know what it is about humans, but we love binaries, this or this. It has to be A or B. Most of the time it's
Yeah.
not. That's not the way
Yeah.
the reality actually works. We just like to create those. But so there was, most everybody was using the Septuagint. It was the final, like, it was the popular one. Everybody spoke Greek. Everybody read Greek. It was easier to communicate with everybody in Greek. Everybody had access to God's word because it was in Greek. That's why they did that. But there was also Hebrew and Aramaic versions running around. It's like you got the Targum, and that's where the Dead Sea Scrolls come from, and so those are also in use, especially in Palestine. So they're still going to have some of those Hebrew texts that are floating around, because you can tell, like Matthew is one who uses both the Greek and the Hebrew. Sometimes he'll quote the Hebrew, sometimes he'll quote the Greek. And there's a lot of people who, if your false binary says you have to have this one or this one, that causes problems. So what do we do when it looks like he's quoting the Hebrew, but he's supposed to, he can't speak Greek because he's a good Jewish boy who grew up in a synagogue? Like, porque no los dos? That's what I'm saying. It's pretty definite that he spoke Hebrew growing up, or spoke Aramaic growing up in Palestine. But Matthew's a tax collector. He has to deal with trade people and all people from all over the place. So you bet that man's going to be fluent in Greek. So,
yeah,
he's going to easily, and there's also some evidence that is coming out from some modern scholars that, like Matthew scholars and Septuagint scholars, that some of those are Matthew's own translations from the Hebrew or the Aramaic into Greek. So you've also got that third contingent, like, possibility going on. And then it's like Porco No's trace. Like, why not? Can't we have space for all of those? Because they're all very viable, realistic options. You're gonna, growing up in Palestine, you're gonna have learned the stuff in Aramaic and Hebrew in the synagogue, but everybody else is using the Greek version, so you're gonna know the Greek. You're gonna use the Greek. It's most people are going to be fluent enough in both because they've heard both, because they're going to read both. So the idea that it has to be one or the other, or the history of the world collapses, I don't know. It's not the way it works. So there's we gotta hold some things in tension, that there's space, that not everything is a binary.
Yeah, so if someone was to ask the question, well, which is more inspired, the Hebrew or the Greek? The New Testament quotes them both at the end of the day.
At the end of the day. And then I would say my first, before I even said that much, my first question would be, define what you mean by divinely inspired. Because that is a whole other question.
Well, it's different, not only in every denomination, but almost in every church. It's a little bit different.
Yep. It's each tradition has its own understanding of what that means and what that looks like. And yeah, that's enough on that one. So I'll get myself in big trouble if we get into that topic, for sure.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. Oh man, this is so much fun. I'm really enjoying this. Okay. Yeah, like this is the problem I get is Amber, I know you're an Old Testament person and I'm an Old Testament guy, and we could stay here for another hour, but we won't. So let's talk about Orthodox theology of the incarnation.
Oh, the incarnation. This is one of my new favorite topics. Because let me explain why. Because so funny story. When in the fall, I had to pick a thesis topic, and I had a couple of really great ideas. And I'm like, I really want to do either this one or this one, but I'm not sure which. And I was sitting and talking with one of the deacons at my parish, and I'm just running those ideas by him. He's like, well, which one do you really want to do that sounds more fun? I'm like, well, this other one about the fullness of the biblical narrative sounds a lot more fun. So I'll do that one. And he's like, okay, so if you're going to argue that, which book do you want to pick? And I was like, I was such a newbie still at that point. I wasn't baptized yet. I was still a catechumen. I still was, struggling to read the apocryphal books at all. And I'm like, I like Jeremiah. His scribe was Baruch. There's a guy, I remember Baruch on the list in the table of contents. So I'll just pick Baruch, right? No idea. And he goes, oh, that's the incarnation. And I was like, huh? Like, how how is that like the incarnation? I don't get that at all. So I'm like, okay, but that sounds interesting because I like Baruch and that's Jeremiah and that's going to be really fun. And I had no idea what I was getting getting myself into because Baruch is amazing. So if you haven't read the book of Baruch, I'll give you just a really quick overview and why it matters because it's incarnational. So Baruch is written from the point of view of Jeremiah's scribe Baruch. And he is sitting in Babylon expressing the grief and the lament, the repentance and the penitence of Israel and the longing for God to bring them back to the land. They figured out we were dumb. We're going to make penance and we're going to collect stuff and send it to Jerusalem and help support who's left in Jerusalem. And while we're waiting for Yahweh to come and save us. So there's, and it's the cry of those in suffering. The first two chapters are how did we get here and a lot of repentance. And then you get chapter 3, which is, well, how we got here is because we were dumb and we walked away from the source of wisdom. And you can't buy wisdom and you can't go find it on your own and you can't take it. You can't claim it. You can't get up to it. Wisdom has to come from God to man because God has wisdom and he gives it and gives it to Israel. And wisdom, when it's fully mature and when Israel's ready and the timing works out, wisdom becomes visible, physically touchable. It shows up on earth. So wisdom comes to lead his people back. And it's like, and then the rest of the book is dealing more with how kind of that works in the story. But Baruch 3, and then this is where which version of the Septuagint you use matters because it's either 35 to 37 or 36 to 38, depending on which. I'm working with the one that's 36 through 38, but it's basically it is John 1.
Really?
Especially John 1:14. Oh, you better believe it.
Wow.
Oh yeah. And I was like, because I was the first time I read that, I got to the section. I'm like, I'm looking for the incarnation, and I'm getting to the end, close to the end of chapter 3, and I'm like, I'm not seeing this, guys. And then I hit that section, and it floored me, and I stopped at 4:2, and I flipped over to the book of John, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Baruch is right here saying God is going to put on flesh and show up in the middle of his people. Like, wow, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. And that the incarnation is the maturation, the fulfilled maturation of all wisdom. Is going to put Genesis 3, going to put on a garment of skin, show up to where he's seeable, touchable, interactable among his people. And I was just absolutely going, oh my goodness. Like, do people argue about does the Old Testament point to the incarnation? A whole lot of, well, maybe, yeah, kind of, a lot of imagery. Baruch, he nails it. And John pulls it in. And then you see it like it's amazingly crazy that it is so clearly pointing to the incarnation there. And it's just, and I was blown away. So it was, I'm like, this is why these books matter, because stuff like this, it can't, it's like, this, and the way that Baruch is written and the way that it tells that story, and that it is the path of knowledge leads to the mature wisdom that comes down to earth amongst his people and saves them. Like, this is not, Genesis 3 happened and now God has to come up with a rescue plan as like plan B, because plan A was nobody would sin and everybody would live in perfection forever. And then people messed up and now God's got to have a plan and B. Baruch is very much definitely saying the incarnation was plan A from the beginning. This is like, and I was just kind of like, I'm still sitting with that. And I'm still like chewing on that's amazing to me, that creation was built around the incarnation is basically what Baruch is saying. Like, I'm still like sitting and on just trying to figure that out. Like, I'm still sitting with that, because, and this is where it gets really, really cool. Yes, Phil, you and I, garments of skin, let's do it, because this is amazing theology, this garments of skin stuff. So I'm going to save that for Phil, because Phil Phil gets that one. Okay. Anyway, so back to this. So
if you give me the great schism, he can have the garments.
So what you've got going on here, and this is where it's really interesting, because the liturgy in the East, the Eastern, what's called the Eastern Rite of the Orthodox Church, uses Baruch for Christmas, for the Nativity. So they make a big deal about, look, fullness of wisdom has come. And that's put there because they were battling Arianism at the time. And so they're like, no, this is not, God is God, and God incarnate is God. So that's kind of why that gets stuck, telling that story of God has come in flesh, Baruch, right? But there's another part that's called the Western Rite, which that's a whole other episode too. That's probably part of the schism episode, explaining the Western Rite. But they use Baruch at Pascha because their nativity focuses on the King has come, and they start with the second coming, and let's go back and talk about the first coming, because the King has come, and then you get to Pascha, and the East is talking about, like the empty tomb and the fulfillment and the light, and this is really cool and amazing. But the West is going, Baruch, look, we're pointing at Baruch to say this is why this matters so much, that wisdom became fulfilled. So the West and the East create this inclusio around the incarnation, which says the fulfillment of the story is the King, is the fulfillment of wisdom that has come to bring that wisdom and salvation to his people through this whole life, death, burial, resurrection. The whole thing matters. You got to have the whole package for the incarnation. The incarnation is not just about the cross. Sorry, Protestants, that's not the point. The point is the whole story. Like, I seriously, you can see there's like Paul Washer is one. I don't like to normally name names, but he deserves it for this one, who actually said
he deserves it.
Oh, he is annoyed when he goes to Easter services to talk about the life of Christ because it's just all about the cross. Sorry, pal. That is not no, you need the whole thing. Life, death, burial, resurrection, and the stuff that happens up to the ascension, right? Because that the whole thing matters. But what Baruch does, and the way that the Eastern Orthodox Church is, because the Western Rite is part of Eastern Orthodoxy, the way that they use those in those liturgies creates this beautiful inclusio that says the entire life of Christ matters. Birth to resurrection. It all is important. The whole thing matters. You need the whole story. You pull out one part. Yeah.
Yeah. I always thought it was very strange, Amber, that we do have these 4 books called Gospels.
Right.
And oddly enough, they spend like a lot of time not talking about the cross. Like in the 4 Gospels, there's usually about half a page that describe the crucifixion. And so what are we doing with all this extra reading? Like, it doesn't, like, what is that doing in a book called The Gospel? It's almost as if it's all important. I don't know.
There's this, one of the things that I learned in several classes throughout seminary was the thing that has the most ink space is the thing that's the most important. And it's like, there's a lot of stuff on the life of Christ. And then you get the death and the burial and the resurrection, which those are why it all matters to get. So I'm not saying none of it is less important than anything else, but
Mm-hmm.
if there's that much ink on the life of Christ, because, if we're supposed to be Christ-like and we're supposed to live like Christ, and you've got most of it all about just being killed on a cross, like, that's a problem.
Right.
Because
Right.
who's going to run around nailing each other on crosses all the time? Like, that's the problem. We need to know how to
Yeah.
live like Christ. So you've got to have a lot of story there to show you how that, because that's what Christ did. He came down and the fulfillment of wisdom to say, look,
Mm-hmm.
guide, here is the path. You can't quite seem to get there. So I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm going to show you how to live. I'm going to show you how to die. And I'm going to show you how to be raised from the dead, because we're all going to do it. Christ comes first and does it for us to show us the way, because it's the way of wisdom, the way of knowledge. It's the incarnation.
Right.
And he
Right.
is leading us through the whole thing, birth to death to resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. So I think most Protestants would agree for sure when it comes to what God does that saves us, whether it's saving us from sin or whatever way you want to understand salvation. Most Protestants agree, okay, the cross is salvific. Jesus needs to die. The resurrection is salvific, because Paul just flat out says in 1 Corinthians 15, if Christ has not been raised, you're still damned. It's basically what Paul says. If there's no
Right.
resurrection, there is no salvation. Now, here's the $1 million question. Is the birth of Christ salvific? Is the incarnation salvific?
I would say yes, because the incarnation is the salvific. It starts this is one of the things that I get sad about, because growing up as a Protestant, in our Western little minds and our living in our little systematic theologies, everything has to be broken down into mechanics, and this is its own thing, and this is its own thing, and this is its own thing. So taking the story of the incarnation, broken it into all of these things, and all of these things mean something different. So the birth has to mean something by itself, standalone. It's its own, doesn't have anything to do with the rest of it thing. The cross has its own thing, that it has to mean this thing by itself, and pulled out alone, it has to mean this. And then you've got most Protestants who don't know what to do with Holy Saturday, like, what's going on there. Most of y'all don't have an answer for that, but there's really cool stuff going on there on that Holy Saturday. And then you've got, then there's the resurrection. And, honestly, Chris, most Protestant theologies treat the resurrection as like the receipt to get out of Costco. And they focused on the cross that the resurrection is just the receipt to get you out of Costco. Because, like, well, why does the cross matter? Well, the resurrection, that's the receipt for what the cross did. The whole story, birth to ascension, is salvific.
The whole story.
The whole story is salvific. I think to try to pull out one moment to say this is the moment that salvation happens is a mistake, because you're leaving out most of the story. You need the entire journey, because if salvation was a one moment on the cross, Jesus could have showed up, died on the cross, and gone right back up. That none of the rest of that would have had to have been done.
Right.
The entire story is salvific, which would I think cause people to pause and wonder, if the entire story is salvific, maybe salvation is more of a process than just one instant thing. Like, maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe there's some more layers to it than that. Maybe it's a process more than just a single moment. Because if Christ's life is necessary, the entire thing is salvific. Maybe there's more to it than just one moment in time.
Yeah, and like, and for for the sake of our listeners, like some people are going to be listening to this, and this is like really new, and
Right.
and they're going to be like, and I mean, when I say really new, um, I mean, like I was in my early 20s the first time I heard somebody preach a sermon on the general resurrection of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And like, so there was such an emphasis on the cross that there was no emphasis even on Jesus' resurrection. And so like this is going to be like
Mm-hmm.
Narnia. Like what are you talking about? Jesus' whole life is salvific. And to kind of like, I think maybe to highlight what Amber is saying, there's a portion in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus is healing people,
Mm-hmm.
and Matthew quotes the Protestant favorite verse from the Old Testament when it comes to atonement.
Mm-hmm.
And that is Isaiah, where Isaiah says, it's a
Mm-hmm.
prophecy about the Messiah, and he says, by your stripes we are healed. And Matthew uses that verse not for the cross, not even for the resurrection, but for Jesus healing sickness
Mm-hmm.
and disease and casting out demons. And so even Jesus doing his miracles is salvific, not just for them, but it's actually salvific for us.
Yep.
And so like this is a deeply embedded thing that's theology that's in the scripture itself.
Yeah. And if you go, I would also challenge people, if you're having trouble with this concept, go back and reread the book of Isaiah and put it in your head that salvation and healing are linked like this. They go together. Salvation and healing are Protestants' favorite word to hate, synergistic. They work together. Salvation is healing, and healing is salvation.
I'm a Wesleyan Arminian. We love that word. We love that word. The Calvinists have a problem with it, but we love it.
Well, and then here you go, Chris. I'm going to blow people's minds again a little bit here, if it's okay with you, because we see that Christ is healing all throughout his life. And if you think about going back to, if sin is sickness and we need healed, and the damage we do to ourselves, we continually drink the poison of death, because of the curse of Genesis 3 is the poison of death. The cross isn't God beating up on Christ to get rid of all the wrath, because that's not what wrath is for and not what wrath does. But that cup of wrath is, this is really cool theology, but that the cup, and actually, Phil, you and I are going to do a video on the cup, because there's a whole lot of imagery going on with cups in the Old Testament. But Christ is drinking the cup of the poison of death, because he is absorbing the toxin of death and is healing us from the poison of death. And that's what's going on there. And then after he's taken down from the cross, this is where this is the two natures thing is so cool. From what I understand. Now, again, go ask a priest, because I'm not an expert here, but you've got the human nature of Christ Sabbathing, a Lord of the Sabbathing, but the divine nature of Christ descends into hell, into Hades, and finishes what happens when Christ drinks that cup of the poison of death. He descends into Hades, busts open those doors, and death is finally given its death nail. Christ finally defeats death in Hades. The gates are burst open. People are all let out, and now they're waiting for the second coming to finish the rest of that, to take all of us into glory with God forever. So the process isn't done on the cross. You have to get down into Hades, and this is First Peter. This is like, it's all over the place. Like, there's so many places where this is in scripture. If you step back from it enough and you start to look and to see that's why the whole story matters, because it's not just the moment on the cross. it is the drinking of the poison of death, because as I think it's Athanasius, I'm going to get in trouble here. Saint Athanasius, I think, that which is not assumed is not healed. If Christ doesn't absorb the toxin of death can't be healed. Christ has to heal that as part of the incarnation. Gregory of Nyssa, yes.
Nazianzus, Gregory
or
of
Nazianzus, right?
Yeah.
I'm terrible at at source quotes, but I love that quote because it deals with with us when there's things in our lives that we can't let go of, and anger and pain and unforgiveness that we hold on to. Christ can't heal that until we give it up. We have to let that go and let him assume it, because it has to be assumed to be healed. It still matters.
So let's talk about that, because this
Mm-hmm.
is okay. First of all, this is one of my absolute favorite quotes from the church fathers, is this particular quote.
Yep.
And most Protestants have never heard this.
Yeah.
Ever. And so and the quote is, that which is not assumed is not healed.
Right.
What does that mean when he says that?
That means that as part, so this is incarnation. Christ has to, and it again, this definitely go talk to a priest, because I am going to mangle this, because this is still newer to me trying to figure this out. But if I understand it correctly, this ties into like Matthew 18, 15 through 18, in that section there, and he's talking about first we start with who is the greatest, and then you get to, if someone causes you to sin, if you're, it's better to lose your hand in your eye than it is to go into hell. And then you get into the section that everybody likes to misuse about church discipline, and then right there at the end of that is the section about the things that are bound in heaven or on earth will be bound in heaven, and things that are loosed on earth will be loosed in heaven. This is what this is talking about, because all of that is healing language, because it's not legal courtroom language. This is love through healing language. So, if someone is sick, we have to, we all live through that unfortunate incident where we had to spend several months inside, right? Sometimes you have to quarantine people to protect them from sickness, not justifying anything or anything. I'm just saying we've all lived through the experience of quarantine, so we know what that's like. But sometimes we need to be quarantined. Sometimes we need to be healed. Like those things have to, all of it matters, because what Christ did in absorbing all of those things. So the things that I'm holding on to, like I said before, those things that I'm holding on to in unforgiveness, in unrepentance, in holding grudges and being bitter and hating people, and those things that we use to tie up ourselves, and the things we can't let go of, and those addictions and all of that stuff, you have to let that go so that Christ can absorb it, because Christ's the incarnation heals all of creation, doesn't just save individuals. It's cosmic. And so it envelops everything, and Christ's victory in the incarnation restores and heals all of creation. So if you don't, like Josh says, the bitter roots, if you don't tear out those roots that are continuing to make you sick in your soul, and your soul wound, and let Christ heal your wounds there, Christ can't heal them until you let them go. So most of us live in a cage of our own making, because we don't open the door, to let Christ let us out and absorb that and heal it for us. So that's why, God isn't going to force it. God's not going to tell you, well, I'm going to do what, this is why certain different types of theology that they say that God determines something from before eternity past, that doesn't work, because then Christ can't assume it and he can't heal it. And you're not, you're removing yourself from salvation, from the very, the incarnation will heal all of cosmic reality, including all of us, but only if we open ourselves to letting Christ get into those very deep, bitter things that we are holding on to, or not even, at the willing to get rid of sometimes. And these things in our love of being victims, my whatever is justified because so and so did something to me. Well, I mean, my wound is talking to your wound. And both of us have wounds that we need to let go of so Christ can heal them. So we stop wounding each other. Because there's a quote by John Chrysostom, St. John Chrysostom, that just, this one I'm still struggling with because this is a hard one. Because he said, I'm just going to paraphrase this because I don't have the actual word for word quote in front of me, but he basically said, no one can harm the man who hasn't harmed himself first. Now, before you get like, wait a second, that means that everything is my fault and it's all to blame. Like I'm the cause of every bad thing that's ever happened to me. That's not what we're saying. Because when you think about, all of us are wounded, and my wound bumps up against your wound, and then that hurts me because I bumped a wound and I bumped your wound, so you're hurting. So, if I have a broken arm and you have a broken arm, and we both turn to do something at the same time and both hit each other with our broken arms, like, that's going to hurt. It's going to hurt me. It's going to hurt you. And that's what he's saying. If my arm's not broken and I bump your arm, it's not really going to hurt me. It's only when I'm broken that I'm hurt, because my brokenness and your brokenness together make more brokenness. So, that's what they're talking about with the incarnation language of that which is that has to be assumed to be healed, because we have to let Christ into all of those dark places we don't want to talk about, because it won't get healed if we don't. And that's why it matters so much.
Yeah. So, like, even in it, I mean, we could go so long talking about incarnation.
Yeah.
Because it is like, and even, like, the deeper you study the incarnation, the more mysterious it becomes.
Right.
Because because basically what we're talking about here, and I think a lot of modern Christians, at least in the West, don't fully understand when we talk about the incarnation. We are not merely talking about God taking on human form, right? Because, like, in Greek mythology, Zeus could take on human form, but he never became human.
Right.
Like we're talking about the divine creator of all things would humble himself, and by humble, I mean humiliate. He would humiliate and humble himself to the point where he didn't take on human form. He literally became an embryo and became truly human.
Right. That's where, like, because, okay, a lot of people, some in certain traditions, like to point to, like, creeds are late developments and they're divisive, and so we just got to reject them all and kind of go do our own thing. But this is why creeds matter, and this is why Nicaea was so important, because they're in the middle of battling Arianism, which denies the divinity of Christ. Like, he's just a dude who showed up. Like, you have to have full intention, full humanity, and full divinity. How does that work? We don't know. This is one of those things where the Orthodox are going to put their hands up and go, "Thea legumina, dude." Does it matter? Because our Western American minds and our culture, the world that is obsessed with logic and science processes that you have to be able to understand a checklist to know how it works, doesn't understand mystery and holding things in tension. It is So I like to say, so I put a meme up on Facebook a few days ago that is, I stole from a good friend last year. So, but it's funny because it uses a quote from the movie Aladdin, right? But it to me, it kind of is a funny way to kind of get this, an idea of this concept. So in it, there's an icon of Christ victorious sitting there, and it's got Christ, holding his scepter and his, as the ruling king, and above it says, phenomenal cosmic power, and then it's got a picture of Mary with, and you can see Christ in the womb, and it says itty bitty living space, from that quote from Aladdin from Disney. Right, phenomenal cosmic power, itty bitty living space. And that's kind of like how that happens. But if we get too stuck in the mechanics of having to explain the hows and take away the mystery, it is, we not only do we flatten it, we ruin it. Like, it's just like, and so I'm going to do this. And Josh Davidson's here, so I'm going to give credit where credit is due, because he did this to me and it helped me kind of understand this. So you and I are going to play a little game for a second here. You ready? Okay, so you and I are going to play a game. All right, ready? Yeah. Okay, we're starting now. It's your turn.
Okay. I don't know what to do.
You see, exactly. That's the cognitive, like the freeze up of like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? When we don't know the rules, that's what happens to us as people, especially as American Westerners. We're like, what am I supposed to do? I need to know the rules. But I don't need to know the rules, because I didn't give you any rules. You could have done whatever you wanted, and then I would have had to come up with a response with whatever I wanted, because there's no rules, right? I don't have to, it's a mystery. It's we got to kind of figure it out on the fly. When we don't have the rules for an expectation, at first we freeze, but when you learn to embrace that and to be able to go, I don't have to know, then you get this beautiful ability for freedom of imagination and improv, and to not have to know. Do I know how the fully God, Christ can be fully human and fully divine? Nope. Do I absolutely love how beautiful it is? Absolutely. And it's because I don't have to know. I can sit with the fact that both can be true at the same time. And that's enough, because I don't need to know the mechanics of how it works. Because that need to know, like Josh says, that immobility, that it can paralyze you. Then you get stuck because you're like, what am I supposed to do? Like, the look on your face was hilarious. So like, you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, we get that, and those are the places when we don't know what to do, where we can be real with Christ, because we're off guard. We don't know. We are totally honest in those moments. We're completely and totally honest. And then we can go back in, like Josh said, and rebuild the frame without having to have the mechanics of how. Because if, people get stuck, like, so the group I grew up in, we're in a lot of ways functional cessationists, and only would believe in miracles if they were medically proven afterwards. Right. So, but you miss so much of what's going on in the world and the universe. The fact that women can give birth, that's a miracle. There's so many things around us that are miracles. And, to try to contain, have a scientific formula to make a miracle provable, I think we're missing the beauty and the majesty of God by having to have that defined. And, there needs to be some guardrails there, which is why creeds are important. The Nicene Creed does a lot of work, and it does a lot of lifting, and it's done a lot of heavy lifting for, a very long time, helping us define how do we understand and put some words on explaining the unexplainable. That's why they matter. And that's why they're important. Should we stick it and make it, I don't know. I don't want to get too far down that road, but
Hmm.
it's why they matter. And they weren't. It wasn't they sat around in Nicaea and it's like we need to invent God. No, they've been wrestling for almost 400 years how to explain the unexplainable. Like, how do
Hmm.
we explain the unexplainable? And you see, that's why you see the progression of these. You've got the Athanasian Creed and the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, and and there's these as they're going, because it takes a very long time to develop enough language to try to give people enough to hang on to try to understand God and the Trinity and to explain the unexplainable. Like, I don't know about you, but I can't explain the unexplainable in 5 minutes. I mean, it took these guys 400 years to figure it out, right?
Hmm.
They're not new developments. They're not scrapping the old one and replacing it with the new one. These are all things that are in development as they're wrestling and learning and growing and maturing. And it's just, it's a process that is a bigger picture of the things that we do in our own lives, because what I believed and the way I would articulate things 20 years ago is not the way I would do it now. And that doesn't mean, I need to completely trash and throw out everything that I had 20 years ago, because there's still value in it, but it doesn't, like, it doesn't mean every a day I wake up and the day before is completely invalid because I learned something new today.
Hmm.
It's the path of knowledge that leads to the maturing of wisdom. And that's what the creeds and councils and that process in church history is doing. So, yeah, like Josh is saying, if you want to lose the meaning, reduce it to its mechanical parts, because
Oh yeah, yeah.
there's
Hmm.
no mystery. There's no, yeah. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think
that's
what's
why
really
all that
interesting.
matters.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's really interesting about this is, um, because I find, especially like in my context in Canada, there's very little theological emphasis goes on to, like, to this idea of Christmas. Like, it's a lot of
Mhm.
times it's more of a cultural holiday than it is even an actual Christian holiday. And
Yeah.
so because of that, there's not a lot of theology that tends to go into this. But in the time of the early church, all of the early heresies had to do with
Mhm.
Jesus' divinity.
Yep.
And so, like, that has to mean something, because
Mhm.
it in fact, like, and again, I think modern Christians don't always think about this, but the early church absolutely mandated that if you do not believe that Christ was both God and human, you're not a Christian. Like, if you don't believe in the incarnation, they wouldn't even let you call yourself a Christian. So this is how important this theology is.
Yep. It is. It is very important. And this is where I don't want to get into this territory, but Christmas is not pagan. It's not.
Yes, can we please
It's
talk about this? Okay. Okay. I, I'm sorry, you guys, but at, as a pastor, okay, the amount of text messages and PMs I get on this topic every single year is ridiculous. And so, anyways, my rant is over. Amber, set them all straight, please. Please set them all straight.
okay. Christmas is not pagan. Okay. And yes, some of what Westerners celebrate, the way they celebrate Christmas and the date that we celebrate Christmas on, has to do with battling the sun cult in Rome and the emperor claiming to be God. Like, that's a thing. Okay. So the pagans had their own thing going on this time of year, but the date wasn't established because we're trying to rescue pagan things. No, they're coming in, they're saying this is the date because you don't get to say that the emperor is king because Christ is king. So we're not. sanitizing, whatever. No, this is one of those things that we see over and over and over in the Old Testament. God is claiming back this territory from pagans. Nope, this is mine. This is Egypt. This is this is the what's going on with Ezekiel and Yahweh showing up in Enlil's territory, like over and over and over. We see this. God is coming in and saying, nope, this is mine. I am claiming it back. We're not Christianizing pagan things. God is reclaiming his territory. And that's what's happening in the West when they're going through all of this. And then there's this other thing where people who either panic because is this pagan, or they make these claims like, well, this is pagan, or, this is just redressing a pagan holiday, seem to have some kind of base assumption that Christians could create their own thing. It's like they're so unimaginative that I have to borrow from pagans and make it, paint it a different color so it looks like Jesus, because we're so unimaginative we can't come up with our own thing. I'm sorry, but no, that's where a lot of this comes from, is the assumption that the early church couldn't have their own traditions that were given from the beginning, because a lot of this is continuous, that changes in Christ because the significance of the incarnation changes what is happening, but it doesn't change the way that they're, doing things. So I'm sorry, you know who you are. That's not what's going on here either. Traditions are being continued through. So it's not like, okay, Jesus ascended, so everybody throw out everything you have and we're going to start from scratch, sitting around the campfire with kumbaya singing and figuring out something from nothing. That's not how it works, right? So they're taking what they have, and it is evolving now because it means so much more because of the incarnation. And it's not, it's not that we don't start over. It's not reboot the system. It's we just are continuing the story that we have, because the significance of the incarnation, the significance of Christ, has amped it up 5 million times, even cooler than it was before. So we're not, no, this is not putting lipstick on a pig to make a pagan thing not a pagan thing so we could use it and say it's Christian. No, Christians have the God who walks in with the authority and says, this is mine. This is ours. These are our traditions. These are our stories. And stop giving ground to people who don't believe it. Don't do it. Mm-hmm. These are our stories. These are our traditions. This is our God. This is our Christ's incarnation that is the reason for Christmas. It is Easter. All of these things are because God's in charge. Mm-hmm. And Christ is why. Like this, yeah, no, that's just not how it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, where do I even begin? Like the amount of pseudo history that is on the internet hurts my brain. Like it actually hurts. It physically hurts my brain, and I feel dumber for listening to it. Like, and for anybody that's listening and you're like, yeah, okay, Amber, but how do you know it's true? Like, whatever. Okay, here's the thing, you guys. And this is according not to Christian scholarship. This is according to atheist scholarship, okay? If anybody would love for Christian to be pagan, it would be the atheist scholars. And here's what the atheist scholars say. Saturnalia was never celebrated on December 25th. Never. Like, okay, like if Christianity was going to steal the holiday, don't you think we would pick the day that the pagans actually celebrated the thing on? Like, it makes no sense whatsoever. Now, here's the other thing. I think anybody from the English-speaking world we really think the whole world revolves around us. Because here's the truth. Only the English speaking world celebrates Christmas on December 25th. Like there are like last year I just got fed up and I did all the research myself. And because that bothers me so much, it's like burned into my brain. There are something like 300 million Orthodox Christians in the world. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 million.
Yep.
And most Orthodox Christians celebrate Christmas in January. And so, like, there are literally millions, hundreds of millions of Christians that don't celebrate Christmas on December 25th. And they have always celebrated it on another day for like 2,000 years. And so, like, I really think like we in the English West, we need to get out of our English speaking world and we need to realize the world is way bigger than we are.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just way bigger than we are. And
yeah.
Anyway, you need to say things because I'll get upset again.
Well, and this has to do with the calendars, because December 25th is on the Julian calendar, and not everybody in the world functions on the Julian calendar.
Correct.
Like there's, and so that's, and even in like the Oriental, most of the Oriental Orthodox stick with the old January 6th date. The Eastern Orthodox, half of them use the old date, half of them use the new date. Like there's 2 dates for Christmas, which is cool because then we get to celebrate Christmas twice, which is awesome. So, we get a longer nativity and we get to celebrate Christmas twice. It's amazing, like, why not? It's cool.
Oh, so okay. So Amber, I love this idea. So in my church, we have a young Ukrainian couple that moved here from Ukraine, and now they attended a Pentecostal church in Ukraine, and so I knew that the Orthodox Christians celebrated on another day, and so I asked this lady, this Ukrainian lady, so when do you celebrate Christmas? Because you're not an Orthodox Christian, you're a Pentecostal. So I asked her, when do you celebrate Christmas? So she told me, well, we celebrate too. And I was like, okay, we need to like change our church constitution. We need to start doing this. Like 2 Christmases. That is the way.
Right. Well, and here's something else that's really cool, because most Eastern Orthodox, not all of them, but most of us, Christmas is a 2-day thing. So we have so to put it in context for you, we've got our own version of Boxing Day, right? So we celebrate 2 days of Christmas. So it's like, not only do we get 2 Christmases, but we get Christmas with 2 days. And so it's just kind of like even cooler. So, but we have our own thing. So it's, like the world is so much bigger than our little corner. And when you start to open up to see there's so many, and the date of Christmas has to do with the difference of calendars, and the date got messed up and they didn't have enough days. And then they tried to cutting things up, and emperors wanting more days in their months. And then January or February, poor guy loses almost all of his days to everybody else. And some months have, it just, all the craziness that was going on trying to develop that crazy Julian calendar. And it's amazing we know when anything is at all. I think actually it's just one of those mercies of God that somebody figured it out, and so I think Chris, I would say taking away from all of this stuff is that we know that the incarnation matters. We know that God physically came. The Son physically showed up on earth. He lived, he healed, he showed, he taught, he died, he rose again, and he ascended, and he promised to come back. That's our assurance. And if you could, there are reasons why we pick the days that we pick. And there's, that's people above my pay grade. Just tell me when to show up for church and I'll show up for church. That's fine. But ultimately, and I'm going to probably get in trouble for saying this too, but ultimately, whether you want to redo the math and decide Christmas is July 14th, what matters is Christ was born, he lived, he healed, he loved, he taught, he died, he rose again, he ascended, and he is coming back for us. The fact is, it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I would put less worry on the math of the dates and focus on living the reality of the incarnation, because that's going to change you more than whether Christmas is December 25th or January 6th. That's not going to change your life. It's not. It's going to make family coordination of who you're going where, when, even more complicated with 2 days of Christmas. But ultimately, that's not going to change your life if it's the 25th or the 6th. What's going to change your life is that Christ showed up. God loved us enough to squeeze himself into this little microcosm of this massive universe to save humanity. That's the thing that has power. And that he did what no other deity could do. And that he chose to drink that poison of death and kill it so that we can live forever in glory with him. That's the thing that matters. That's why the incarnation story, the whole thing matters. Not just one part. It all matters.
Wow, that's beautiful. All right. Well, I think that's a lovely place that I think we can we can put the bow on this. Yeah, that was beautiful. Amber, if there was one thing that we talked about during this conversation that you would, if there was one thing that somebody could take away from this, which thing would you highlight?
Wow. Since I just wrapped up with the incarnation, then I will say that I did that one. So I will say this. Go get a copy of the Septuagint and read those books. I promise you will not spontaneously combust. It will not kill you. You will not burst into flames. There are value in those stories. You don't have to hold them the same as you do the Gospel of Matthew. I'm not saying shove it in your Bible. I'm saying those stories are important. They teach us stuff. We learn stuff. And if you read Maccabees, like I have war elephants in my Bible, which is cool. So, read the books, read the Septuagint, because it matters. It's another layer to the story. So read it.
Amen.
Chris is getting everybody in his church copies of the Septuagint for Christmas. So just kidding.
So I very selfishly absolutely agree with every word you just said, Amber. And the reason why in my personal Bible study time, I'm reading the Septuagint as my Old Testament readings. And because I'm way too Protestant, I have a copy of the Tyndale New Testament, the English version that William Tyndale wrote, and that's going to be my New Testament reading. And so right now I just finished the book of Leviticus in the Septuagint, and so I'm totally on board with this spiritual principle of reading the Septuagint. I think the thing that I would highlight from this conversation is all of Jesus' life is salvific. It's and I know this is dangerous to say, but the cross is not the only important part of the gospel. But literally everything Jesus did, Jesus' birth is salvific. Jesus healing sick people is salvific. Jesus casting out demons, like Christus Victor, is atonement theology that needs to be embraced. I really believe that. And I just want to back up what Amber said. And some Protestants don't know this, but lots of the Protestants, they actually taught that reading reading what they would have called the Catholic books, but they're not really the Catholic books. But reading the Deuterocanon is actually good. And this has always been a part of Protestantism. It wasn't until very recently that we stopped encouraging people to read the Deuterocanon. And so I would just encourage you. In fact, as a Protestant pastor, I have like 20 Bibles on my bookshelf, and 10 of them include the Apocrypha, including the King James. And so here's the thing. And I'm going to end by offending everybody by saying this. You do not have a legitimate King James Bible if it does not have the Apocrypha. So there you go.
There you go. You can actually get an ESV version of the Apocrypha. You can get, it's available NASB. Like there's a whole bunch that are. And I'm actually going to send you a recommendation for a New Testament translation and dare you to read it.
Oh, I love it. Love it.
I will do that because I think it would be cool for you to do.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you all for for spending time with Amber and myself as we talked about the incarnation. We're going to have to do like several more videos to actually do Orthodox theology any justice whatsoever, and so that'll be fun going forward. We'll do at least one more for sure. Amber, why don't you remind everybody where they can connect with you and how they can get a hold on some of your content online?
Yeah, you can go to my YouTube channel, When Deep Calls Deep Amber. And I actually was today working on, I have a new intro. I'm doing some rebranding for my channel and I'm planning some stuff that is going to be coming out. We've got another Why Leviticus Matters coming up at some point. I've got a video I'm going to be doing on the incarnation. I've got a series on the history of liturgy that I'm putting together. January 13th, Leighton Flowers and Spencer Owen, good grief, I'm tired, are coming. We're going to do another episode of reading the hard parts of the Bible, and we're going to specifically talk about what Calvinism does to the Bible and how it is harmful and it makes it hard to read. So that'll be really interesting and probably the only controversial thing I probably ever do on my channel. I usually don't do controversial stuff. My stuff is usually focusing on positive and looking things at in a positive way as much as I can. And then Mr. Josh Davidson and Garrett Skidema, I'm trying to coax them back for another episode of From the Imagination of the Storyteller, which was a fantastic episode. I would highly encourage you guys to watch it if you haven't. We really blow some people's minds in that one, but it was fantastic. So there's a lot of really good stuff that's going to be coming out on my channel as my schedule allows. Trying to not kill myself finishing this thesis. So, and then you can email me. My email address is on my YouTube channel, or you can find me on Facebook because I don't have Twitter anymore. I got rid of it. It was just I didn't want to be in the cesspool of that negativity anymore. So I got rid of my Twitter channel.
Yeah, I can confirm all of that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a video.
Yeah. Well, well, you guys, this channel is dedicated to, obviously, tonight we spent just about 2 hours diving into theology. If you enjoy theology, if you enjoy stories about faith and spirituality, be sure to like this video to support us, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more fun theological collabs that I'm going to be doing with Amber and Josh and all these great people that you need to know about. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate you watching, and we will catch you all in the next video.